This is not a painting. This is a real photograph. An American farm in 1936, in rare original Kodachrome color. Now step through the kitchen door with me, into the room where a family of 6 was fed on almost nothing. Every single thing in it had to earn its place. Some of what you're about to see, you'll remember. And one of them, most people under 50 have never seen at all. The black cast-iron wood cookstove stood in the corner, hulking and patient, its nickel-plated trim catching the kerosene lamplight. In this photograph from Alabama, 1936, a woman in a calico dress lifts the lid to stir a pot of beans. Every morning began with kindling and a match, the fire banked overnight. By noon, the oven held biscuits and the reservoir simmered water for washing dishes. A new model cost about $20, some $460 in today's money, a painful sum when a farm family's yearly cash income might be $500. But it was the heart of the home. It cooked, heated the room, and dried socks on the warming shelf. By the 1950s, rural electrification brought sleek, chrome and white gas ranges. The wood stove felt like heavy, dirty work, a relic of a harder life, and families traded it for the clean, instant flame of modernity. The cookstove demanded constant attention. You learned to read the fire. Too hot and the bread burned, too cool and the beans never softened. In a photograph from Iowa in 1939, a daughter in pigtails pumps water into a granite-ware kettle while her mother adjusts the damper. The stove's flat top held 4 or 5 pots at once, and the oven door doubled as a footrest on winter evenings. But it was unforgiving. The flue had to be cleaned weekly, and a faulty draft could smoke out the whole kitchen. By the late 1940s, rural electric cooperatives brought cheap power to the countryside. The new electric ranges offered precise heat without soot or sweat. The wood stove, once a necessity, became a symbol of drudgery, slowly pushed to the barn or sold for scrap as families chose convenience over memory. On the counter near the stove sat a white enamel bucket with a snug lid, filled with something that made biscuits flaky and cornbread taste like Sunday morning. It was the lard can of rendered pork fat, the family's cooking oil, shortening, and flavor base all in one. Every few days, a housewife would dip her hand in, scoop out a dollop, and rub it into flour or melt it in a cast-iron skillet. A 5-pound block cost about 20 cents in 1934, some $4.60 in today's money, and it lasted for weeks. In this photograph from Alabama, 1936, you can see the bucket sitting beside a flour sack, its lid slightly ajar, a metal ladle resting inside. Lard was prized for its high smoke point, its tenderizing power, and its savory taste. But then came Crisco in the 1910s, marketed as purer and more hygienic. By the 1940s, vegetable shortening cost less and needed no refrigeration. Lard slowly vanished from kitchens, not because it was bad, but because convenience and cheaper factory products edged it out, and eventually it came to be seen as old-fashioned, low-class, and even unhealthy. Today, a few nostalgic cooks have brought it back, but in 1930s farm families, it was the heart of the kitchen. In a 1930s farm kitchen, flour and feed sacks were never just sacks. After the last of the flour was scooped out, a woman would carefully unpick the seams, wash the cotton in a galvanized tub, and lay it flat on the grass to dry. Those sacks, stamped with colorful patterns, blue gingham, rose-printed calico, became aprons, dresses, even underwear for the children. In this photograph from Alabama, 1936, you can see a little girl standing by the wood stove in a dress made from a chicken feed sack, the faint outline of a Purina stamp still visible on the hem where the dye didn't bleach out. A single sack cost about 10 cents, roughly $2 today, and a family might save a dozen over the winter to piece together a whole outfit. Day after day, those sacks served double duty. The same cloth that held grain for the chickens would, by nightfall, be cut and stitched into a work shirt for Pa or a school dress for the eldest girl. Women traded sack colors at church socials. I've got 2 sacks of the blue floral, you've got the red plaid, to make matching sets. A full outfit, dress, apron, and a sunbonnet might use 3 or 4 sacks, costing about 30 cents in flour and feed you'd have bought anyway. When factory-made cotton goods dropped in price during the late 1940s, store-bought dresses became cheaper than the hours of labor required to remake a sack. So the practice slowly faded, seen as old-fashioned and a mark of hard times. By the 1950s, the sack dress tradition had all but vanished. What had been a necessity became a secret shame. Women stopped telling their daughters that the pretty dress came from a chicken feed sack. They lied, said it was from the catalogue. The cloth itself changed too. Feed companies switched to paper bags decorated with plain white or brown paper, which couldn't be reused for clothing. In this photograph from Iowa, 1941, a farm wife stands at her kitchen range, wearing a dress made from a flour sack, her hands covered in flour. Her expression is proud, but by the end of that decade, such pride would be hidden. The practice only survived in the memory of those who remembered the comfort of a cotton dress that cost nothing but a little soap and thread. The icebox stood in the corner, a heavy wooden cabinet lined with zinc or porcelain. In this photograph from Arkansas, 1938, you can see the family's daily ritual. A man carrying a fresh block of ice wrapped in burlap, dripping onto the linoleum. The ice cost about 25 cents a block, delivered 3 times a week, roughly $5 a month, or about $90 in today's money. Inside, butter kept firm in a stone crock, milk stayed cool in a covered pitcher, and leftover stew lasted a day or two. But the ice melted fast, and the drip pan underneath had to be emptied every morning, or else a puddle spread across the floor. By the late 1940s, rural electrification reached most farms, and electric refrigerators, like the Frigidaire, began appearing in catalogues. They cost around $200, steep for a farm family, but they freed women from the daily ice order and the endless mopping. The icebox lingered in pantries for another decade, used for dry storage, then sold at auctions or repurposed as a kitchen cabinet. The iceman's route faded, and with it the drip pan, the burlap wrap, the sound of iron tongs lifting a block of ice. The icebox's slow disappearance was not outlawed, but quietly rendered obsolete. Electric refrigerators, once a luxury, became a necessity as grocery stores replaced home canning, and frozen foods entered the market. By 1950, fewer than 1 in 10 farm kitchens still used an icebox. In a photograph from Iowa, 1947, a young girl opens a gleaming refrigerator to take out a bottle of milk. No dripping, no ice block, no chore. The icebox's end was a trade, convenience for connection. A constant hum instead of a daily visit from the iceman. Walk past the wood stove and your eye settles on the pantry door. Behind it, wooden shelves bowed under the weight of mason jars, green beans, tomatoes, peaches, each one sealed with a pop of wax or a zinc lid. In this photograph from Alabama, 1936, you can see a woman's hands arranging the last of the summer's corn in pale yellow rows. A full winter's worth of canning cost about $20, some $460 in today's money, but it meant survival through the cold months. Every morning, she'd reach for a jar of applesauce to dot the oatmeal, or a pint of green beans to warm with bacon grease for supper. The root cellar below held bushel baskets of potatoes and onions, their earthy smell seeping up through the floorboards. But by the 1950s, home canning felt like a chore from a harder time. Supermarkets offered canned vegetables at a dime a can, and the glossy labels promised convenience. One by one, the jars went empty and the shelves stayed bare. The canning kettle sat on the stove from August through October, a constant low rumble. The whole family shared the work. Children snapped beans on the back porch until their thumbs ached, and Grandpa churned the peach butter over a low fire. One summer, a girl's mother canned 150 quarts, enough to fill every shelf twice. She marked each lid with a date and a slash of blue paint, the last jar used just before the next summer's canning began. That cycle felt like the natural rhythm of time itself. But after the war, frozen peas arrived in waxed boxes, and a new freezer sat humming in the garage. Home canned goods began to taste like poverty, not pride. By the 1960s, many families donated their jars to church rummage sales, and the knowledge of rubber rings and hot water baths faded into the silence of old cookbooks. The root cellar's dirt floor stayed cool even in July, and you could smell the earth and the faint sweetness of stored apples. A single bulb on a frayed cord cast a weak yellow glow over the shelves. Here sat jars of pickled beets, ruby red, and crocks of sauerkraut weighted with a plate. In this 1935 Kansas farm photograph, a boy holds a jar of his mother's green beans up to the light, grinning at the perfect seal. The pride of that moment was real. Yet after the war, modern kitchens boasted built-in cabinets and canned goods from the store, and the root cellar became a place for forgotten things: old tires, broken tools. By the 1970s, most farmhouses had either sealed it up or turned it into a workshop. The jars that remained grew cobwebs, their seals popped, and the food inside turned to dust. At the kitchen sink stood the hand pump, a cast-iron guardian of the household water supply. In the Library of Congress photo, Child Pumping Water, Farm Security Administration, 1936, a young girl in a cotton dress strains to work the long handle, her bare feet planted on the worn wooden floor. Every morning, the first chore was to pump a bucketful for coffee and washing up. The rhythm was a steady clank-clank squeak as leather washers moved water from the well below. A family of 4 might use a dozen buckets a day, cooking, washing dishes, bathing in a tin tub. The pump itself cost about $20, some $460 in today's money, a significant investment for a farm family. By the 1940s, rural electrification projects began to reach these farms, and electric pumps and indoor plumbing slowly replaced the hand pump. It became a relic of a harder, simpler time, remembered in faded sepia photographs. In a corner of the kitchen, next to the flour bin, sat a common coffee can. The label had long been peeled away, leaving behind a faint ring of rust. This can held the family's savings, coins and the occasional crumpled bill tucked inside by a weary hand. On Saturday nights, after the farm accounts were tallied, the father might fish out a few nickels for the child who had been brave at the dentist. A new radio cost about $20 back then, some $460 in today's money, and the can was the only bank they trusted. In this photograph from Alabama, 1936, you can see a woman drop a penny into a lard pail with a slot cut in its lid. By the 1950s, federal deposit insurance and the spread of rural banks made the coffee can savings jar feel like a risk rather than a necessity. It faded, seen as an old-fashioned, low-class relic of hard times. The coffee can stood as a quiet witness to small joys and silent emergencies. When the egg money came in, the housewife would drop a few coins in, her apron still smelling of bacon grease. The can's dull clink was a sound of hope. But in the 1940s, war bonds and bank accounts promised patriotic safety. By the 1950s, a charge account at the general store made savings seen as something from the past. The coffee can wasn't banned, it simply became something you just didn't use anymore. Some families repurposed the can as a kitchen measure, scooping flour or sugar until the rust took over. In a photograph from Iowa, 1940, a woman holds the can up to the light, checking the level of coins. The Great Depression taught that every penny mattered, but by the war's end, a coffee can savings jar was a reminder of want. People wanted to forget. The can disappeared into attics or was thrown out, replaced by savings accounts and checkbooks. It wasn't illegal. It was just not something anyone wanted to look at anymore. In the corner of nearly every farm kitchen sat a humble breadboard, scarred from years of kneading. Beside it, a stoneware yeast crock, cool and damp, held the family's sourdough starter, a living heirloom passed from mother to daughter. Every few days before dawn, the woman of the house would flour the worn oak board and work the spongy mass with her palms, adding just enough flour to keep it from sticking. The crock, glazed brown on the inside, stood about a foot tall and cost perhaps 50 cents in 1930, less than $9 today. In this photograph from Alabama, 1936, you can see the crock tucked beside the stove, its lid slightly ajar, the starter bubbling gently in the warmth. The whole kitchen smelled of yeast and rising dough, a promise of bread for supper. When not in use, the board was propped vertically against the wall, its surface scoured clean with salt and a damp cloth. The crock was kept in the cool pantry, its thick walls insulating the starter from heat and cold alike. But by the 1950s, these tools slipped away. Supermarket bakeries and cheap sliced bread made home baking a chore for old women. Factory-produced yeast packets replaced the fussy starter, no more daily feeding. And the board? Formica countertops and electric mixers made the old kneading stone unnecessary. In one Michigan kitchen photo from 1938, a grandmother's hands dust flour from the board, a fleeting art of a homesteading era. The real cost? Time, 2 hours of kneading, rising, punching down, rising again. And the crock needed weekly scalding to keep mold at bay. By the 1960s, young wives saw the board and crock as relics of poverty. They wanted gleaming counters and packaged cake mixes. The crock found new life as a cookie jar, the board as a cutting surface for vegetables. But the daily rhythm, that heartbeat of the kitchen, stopped. In a final Arkansas photo, 1939, a child sniffs the breadboard, its scent of yeast and memory a last echo of self-sufficiency. In the center of the table stood the kerosene lamp, a glass chimney resting on a brass base, its wick trimmed each morning. This was the farm family's sun after sunset. In this photograph from Iowa, 1938, you can see the lamp casting a soft amber glow on a father signing a crop loan. A gallon of kerosene cost about 10 cents, roughly $2 today, and a family would burn through one every 2 weeks. The lamp's light was just enough for mending, reading, or a game of cards. But as rural electrification crept across the plains, these lamps dimmed. By the 1940s, REA lines brought bulbs that flooded the room with light. The lamp became a backup, then a decoration, then a memory. The lamp was a daily companion. Each evening, mother would light it with a match, adjust the wick until the flame burned blue and steady. Then she'd add the chimney, careful not to crack it. The light was faint, you'd strain your eyes to read a news page. Kerosene cost a penny a pint, so every drop mattered. Children did homework in that small pool of light, their elbows on the table, the lamp between them. The lamp disappeared, not because it failed, but because the grid succeeded. Electric lights were cleaner, brighter, and didn't leave a greasy film on the walls. By the late 1940s, the lamp was stored in the shed, a relic of a darker time. Now, let your eyes rest on the kitchen table. It was not merely a place to eat. It was the family's workbench, school desk, and social center rolled into one. In this photograph from Alabama, 1936, you can see a worn pine table covered with oilcloth, scratched from countless meals, ink stains from homework, and the faint ring of a hot iron. Here, a mother might shell peas while a child practiced penmanship, and come evening, the whole family gathered for a supper of beans and cornbread. A good solid table like that cost about $20, some $460 in today's money. It was built to last a lifetime, but as factory-made furniture grew cheaper and the dream of a separate dining room took hold, these humble multi-purpose tables were replaced by fragile veneered sets. The old table was pushed to the garage or sold for a pittance. It had never been fashionable, only indispensable. In the 1940s and 1950s, things changed. Advertisements promised a modern life with chrome-legged dinette sets and plastic laminated tops. They were easy to wipe clean and looked sleek. The old farm table, with its honest scars, was seen as old-fashioned and low-class. By the 1960s, antiques dealers were snapping them up for a song. But for those who grew up around one, no other table ever felt quite right. The new ones were too light, too sterile. They didn't hold the memory of 1,000 elbows. And so the old tables faded from American kitchens, edged out by cheaper factory products and the lure of convenience. By the 1970s, they were often called primitive, a polite word for obsolete. Yet something of them lingers. In flea markets today, you can find them, bought for $50 and gawked at as relics. But for those who once lived around such a table, no price can measure what it held. The scratch of the salt cellar, the dent from a dropped rolling pin, the shape of the family worn into the wood. Which of these was still in your family's kitchen when you were growing up? Tell us in the comments. And if this kitchen felt like coming home, a thumbs up and a subscribe helps keep these memories alive.